As a remote worker, you find yourself sometimes isolated because your entire community is online. And so it's really easy just to stay inside and stay at your computer and not have a reason to branch out.
That's Taylor Allen. In 2018, Taylor was a recent college graduate who had taken a remote job. That meant she could live anywhere.
So she went to Florida. But the glamour of working from the beach wore off fast.
I had no reason to really leave my house unless I was, going to the beach or going to the pool.
Taylor's main source of community at the time was an online church.
I followed Transformation Church pretty religiously, no pun intended, and just really was captivated by the pastor and felt really supported by the community, even online. And so I was just curious where his church was. And I looked it up and I saw that Transformation Church was in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I was like, all right, there is no reason I would ever find myself in Tulsa. I don't even know where that is.
Then, in November 2018, she got an email with an interesting subject line.
Work remotely, get paid $10,000 to move to Tulsa.
It was an invitation to apply to something called Tulsa Remote, a program designed to entice remote workers from around the world to live in, you guessed it, Tulsa, Oklahoma.
The prospect of being able to have a faith community to join and a community in general, that was really the impetus for me applying.
She sent in her application and waited. And then, one day...
I remember exactly where I was. I was at a restaurant with my mom and my stepdad, and I got an email from Tulsa Remote, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm hearing back. And the email said, we have been overwhelmed with the response. We've gotten over 10,000 applications. We weren't expecting that, but we want to invite you to interview.
Taylor really wanted that spot, so she got to work.
I'd really done my research about Tulsa and the organizations, NGOs, initiatives here that really spoke to my interests and my passions in ways that I could give back and be connected here if I were to make Tulsa home.
She was accepted, and 1 short month later, she was moving.
I moved sight unseen, so I'd never been to Tulsa.
Without ever visiting, wow.
Without ever visiting, yeah. So I was number 4 to ever move with Tulsa Remote. So I was early guinea pig.
Wow.
And that forced me to really connect with the community and local Tulsans. And so last March, when I moved to Tulsa, all the way to March of, what's this year? 2020.
I too would like to forget what year it is.
Yeah. March of 2020, when my year was up with the program, I remember that day and realizing, wow, Tulsa is home. And I do not see myself leaving Tulsa anytime soon. And Tulsa Remote obviously wanted to keep me because they offered me a job.
Nice.
So that helps as well. But it was that sense of community, that connection. The opportunities are endless in Tulsa, and I love that.
So this timeline is pretty remarkable, Taylor. What do you think about it? Because so March 2019 to March 2020, you're like on the forefront of this movement. March 2020, COVID happens. Obviously, the world changes, and this idea of remote work is now on everybody's radar in a way that it wasn't even a month before, right? So I'm curious, how did COVID change the way you think about remote work for you personally, but also kind of where it might be going for everybody?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are remote forward now. I remember telling people that I worked remotely, and there was a huge question mark with what that meant. And now it's the norm. Also, it's making me realize that as a remote worker, where you live matters. And we see so many applications from people in New York and in California who are just ready to flee the coast, ready to flee higher cost of living and to move to Oklahoma to have space and to have openness and have open air and clear blue skies and an opportunity to connect with community. So COVID has made me realize how convenient remote working is, but also how it really is our future.
Welcome to City of the Future, a podcast from Sidewalk Labs. Each episode, we explore ideas and innovations that could transform cities. I'm Eric Jaffe.
And I'm Vanessa Quirk. In this episode, we're exploring an idea that could change not just the way we live in cities, but which cities we live in, too.
Remote work.
So, Eric, we've been working from home for about 8 months now.
I hadn't noticed.
Yeah. So how has it been going? How has remote work been for you?
In a lot of respects, it's very challenging. My wife, Janine, she also works from home. She's worked at home this entire time. And, our marriage is great.
You guys are still married, just for the record here, despite 8 months of cohabitation and co-working, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, there are definitely challenges.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the podcast, this has actually been a breeze. I mean, this is the one thing that got better, I think.
Yeah, I agree, actually. I mean, we used to, every single time we had to record a podcast, we used to make sure we had this one booth and we would get in there.
Mm-hmm.
I would even sometimes jerry rig it so the air conditioning wouldn't come on, so we would get the perfect sound quality for our podcast.
For you listeners.
Just all for you guys. And then, as soon as we were recording from home, we were like, oh, we can just set up a mic in our bedrooms and it's fine.
Yeah, if there's a picture in the dictionary of a super spreading event, it would be that little podcast booth with 4 people crammed in and stuffy air floating around for an hour on those little tiny seats. Yeah. So from a podcast hosting perspective, remote work has been way better. And in fact, I think we'd continue to do it this way, even if the office opened back up. Wouldn't you think?
Yeah, I think so. And it is interesting because there are a lot of companies that, we've been reading about that are starting to offer this option to their workers, right? You don't have to go back. You could be remote indefinitely, maybe forever.
What would you do if you had that option?
Oof. I mean, that's a tough one. I mean, there is something attractive about going somewhere with more nature, somewhere cheaper, right? Working from there. But I don't know, even though I don't miss the booth per se, I do miss the office. I think I would go back.
To be honest, I'm not going back. I'm not going back to that old way. It was taking too much out of me. I'm not going to deal with it.
That's Richard Florida, a professor of urban economics and an advisor to Sidewalk Labs. We wanted to hear what he thinks remote work will mean for the future of cities.
I mean, for me, I've liked being home. I find that I like my neighborhood better. I find that I like my life better. My kids are 3 and 4. It's given me a lot more time to spend with my 2 girls. So I've gotten to know my neighbors a lot more. I've gotten to be like cycling buddies with my neighbors that I wasn't before. So we go out on long rides. We have people over on the front porch a lot. We set up a front porch. I mean, we had like an urn out there. Now we set up a front porch.
For Richard, it wasn't just neighborhood life that improved. Teaching classes got better too.
I taught my course online. So I was able to bring in people from all over the world, mayors, urban economic developers, people from technology companies. We had to learn how to do it, and we got better at it. But another big thing for me was showing me the ability to do remote teaching and having it go very successfully. So I actually think that's going to be a big deal.
It is interesting that your experience highlights the 2 different advantages of remote work, right? On the one hand, in your teaching, you've brought in all of these global perspectives more than ever before. And on the other hand, at the same exact time, you're so much more keyed into the local, right? Like what's happening outside your front door.
Yeah, it made me appreciate the local in ways. I mean, as a 40-year career in urbanism, I never would have thought. But the other thing is my neighborhood was a commuter neighborhood for knowledge workers, for corporate people. Which means as a remote worker and a professor and writer, I was the only adult man in the neighborhood during the day. And I really felt like a freaking oddball. Now, there are a lot of guys my age in the neighborhood all the time, like out with their kids or out hanging around or going to the park.
So it sounds like the daytime population of your neighborhood has gone up dramatically. But do you have a sense of what the daytime population's now like in the commercial districts of Toronto, in those corporate knowledge sector places that the folks you live around aren't going to anymore?
It's terrible. There's not many people down there. And, I had thought more of those buildings were residential, and they're not. They are still office work. So I think personally, the Central Business District is a historical relic. During the Industrial Revolution, beginning with manufacturing, we separated work from life. People used to work where they live if they were artisans or producers, live above their shop. And then as we added transportation innovations like subways and trains and transit. People started to commute more and more, not just to factories, but to offices. And we developed these giant commercial towers and stack and pack knowledge workers. I just think a lot of that's going away. And I think this shift to virtual or remote work is a big part of it.
Richard told us that this forced experiment in remote work has hastened a process that was already in motion, not just for individuals, but for cities too.
The future of economic development is talent. There is now no other economic development strategy. And, I'm talking to economic developers all the time, and it's like light bulbs are going off in their head. If you want to talk about the new economic development or the new city competition, it's been this shift away from the power of firms to the power of talent. And I think that especially in an era of remote work, the location of talent will be ever more important. And cities will, and communities and suburbs and rural areas, the terms of the competition will be about competing for talent, competing for workforce, competing for people, competing for remote work.
So the big question is, in an era where every city must now compete for remote workers, what can cities do to attract them?
There is a place that has a really compelling answer to this question. Estonia. Believe it or not, the small Baltic nation of Estonia is one of the most digitally enabled countries in the world. For years, I'd been reading about its remarkable transformation, and in the summer of 2019, I decided to go see it for myself. And although I went before COVID, Estonia has only become more relevant in a post-pandemic remote world. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to 2019, back to when traveling was still a thing.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Tallinn.
The first stop on my journey was to the E-Estonia Briefing Center in the capital city of Tallinn. That's where I met Annette Numa.
So my name is Annette, and I work in the Estonia Briefing Center as a speaker.
Annette explained that to understand how Estonia got to where it is today, you have to go back to 1991, back to when the Soviet Union collapsed and Estonia gained its independence.
It was very easy for us to build everything from a very scratch. So as we didn't have any kind of system here yet when we gained independence. And luckily, Estonia had a very young government and our prime minister was in his 30s at the time. And then he said, okay, but what about technology? Maybe technology is just able to help us.
The advent of the internet was very exciting to Estonia in the 90s, especially because it emerged just as this young country was building its government from scratch. The first service that they put online was taxes.
At 1999, we have done that online, and it just takes us like 1 or maximum 2 minutes.
Estonia didn't stop there. They wanted every single government service to be accessible online. And to make it work, they issued a mandatory ID card for every Estonian citizen. It's like a driver's license, a library card, a health insurance card, a coffee shop loyalty card, all rolled into one. You can even use it to vote online, wherever you are.
The last time when we had elections, I was having my vacation in Maldives, in a paradise island.
Yeah.
And I was just lying on a beach. I grabbed my laptop. We had internet connection there, and I voted for the candidate I wanted to.
And have you found that the fact that you are so digitally enabled, has that also convinced Estonians to stay and not necessarily leave the country?
I used to live in France. I did my master's studies there. And the reason why I'm back here in Estonia is not the weather.
Right.
So, I mean, it's raining and it's cold. And I was living in a beautiful French city. The reason why I came back was 100% the ease of life.
Annette's not the only one. While I was there, I met another Estonian who had just returned home.
I just moved back from US a few years ago.
That's Sten Tamkivi. He's the chief product officer at a company called Topia, a startup that helps companies manage their global workforce. He was thinking about the question of how to compete for workers years before COVID was on anyone's radar.
We are in a world where every single government, would it be every single city or every single country, is competing for every single citizen. The only difference is, do they know that? And are they doing something about that or not?
And to Sten, ease of life, that's Estonia's competitive advantage for attracting remote workers who can choose to live anywhere.
The top talent in the world in any field is free to choose where they live and work and what do they do they do with their life? Where are they happy and fulfilled and make most of their potential? And so that means that you have people whose incentives are to find the best environment for them, which means that you screw up your environment, people will leave faster than ever before. And you do something great, people will find you and come there faster than ever before.
In the early days of his company, Sten and his team did some research to see what draws talented workers to cities.
There was some criteria that were always sort of still high up. Clean air. So it's like a Maslow pyramid, sort of the staying alive kind of matters. And tolerance for minorities, which just because of the nature of people who, by definition, when they move to a new place, they are the minority, they are the immigrant. And like a few, this basic core sort of human safety things are relatively high up. But from there, it's a Wild West. It's everything. Somebody cares about proximity to mountains because they're a snowboarder. And anybody who has kids, immediately education quality goes to number one. Right. So there are like pockets like that, but it's less uniform.
Sten became convinced that what cities truly need is something that makes them stand out, something that makes them unique.
What is your distinguishing factor? What's your unique selling proposal that you have for the world? It might be your language, your culture, your heritage. It might be something future-looking.
In Estonia, it's definitely the latter. Thanks to its forward-looking digital infrastructure, Estonia is perfectly set up to attract remote workers. Workers like Chantel Rowe.
I've lived in London and Bristol, and I moved to Switzerland for a year and lived in Geneva, lived in Paris for 5 years.
She's lived and worked in a lot of places.
San Francisco and now Estonia. So kind of experienced the gamut of how easy it is to get set up in a country and what those pain points are. I mean, I bounce around every 3 to 4 years. I know what's annoying. Getting a social security ID number, getting, your healthcare set up, getting a bank account set up. All these things vary in terms of complexity.
But in Estonia, thanks to that ID card, it isn't complex at all. To show me how it works in action, Chantel took me on Tallinn's transit system.
As soon as I got my ID card, I registered my ID card instead, and now it just taps through.
And it's free, which is cool.
It's totally free, yes.
So, and which stop are we going to?
We are going to Virukeskus, which is just a center stop.
Chantel took me to an ordinary supermarket for a not-so-ordinary shopping experience.
So, the first thing I'm going to do is tag my card. Oh, okay. It knows that I am English-speaking, so It puts my little gun in English. And now we go and shop, and I check myself out as we go along.
Wait, I'm confused. What is this? You called it a gun, but it looks like a remote control. What is it for?
So, we will scan the things as we go along and walk out of the store.
Oh, cashierless.
Cashierless, correct.
Oh, that's neat.
So yeah, it's super fast and easy and trust-based, which I like.
But it's not just the shopping that's easy. Thanks to that ID card, Chantel has access to everything. It's all easy.
So having this identity that ties to just me, I'm a person who lives in Estonia, has made everything easier to get access to. It's been an incredibly easy transition.
So it really sounds like Estonia is perfectly set up to attract remote workers.
Mm-hmm. And remember, I visited Estonia in 2019, right? I think it's even more attractive now post-pandemic. In fact, I called Annette back up just a few weeks ago and I asked her, how has Estonia navigated COVID?
And how'd they do?
She said it was surprisingly seamless because everything was already online. Schools, offices, government services all went remote basically overnight. And so the only thing that's changed for Annette is that she now has a new title of Digital Transformation Advisor, and she's getting more interest from countries looking to have their own digital transformations.
I mean, that makes sense to me,
right,
especially now that COVID has made more people see the benefits of going remote.
Mm-hmm. But I have been wondering, as much as digital infrastructure could certainly attract you to a place, I wonder if it would make you stay.
It's a good question. I think for some people, probably yes. But others are definitely going to need more. I mean, think about Taylor Allen from Tulsa Remote. For her, it wasn't about digital infrastructure at all. What took her to Tulsa and what made her stay was the social infrastructure, the people.
If you think about Tulsa Remote, the skeleton of it is an economic development project, right? We're moving people to Tulsa who already have jobs, and therefore they're going to be investing financially and economically into Tulsa. But the skeleton in and of itself is not enough. And so the heart of this program is that community aspect that is creating a really promising environment, not only for Tulsa Remote members, but also for the city of Tulsa.
And so far, they're succeeding. Most people who do the program end up staying.
We've only had a handful leave. We've invited 320 people to move to Tulsa, or seen that many move so far, and we just keep growing. It's exciting.
The more these remote workers put down roots in Tulsa, the more they're investing in their new communities, the more Tulsa will be able to grow and improve and attract even more workers.
It's a virtuous cycle, one that allows Tulsa to compete with other cities, but in a way that stays true to Tulsa.
We're not trying to reinvent or make another San Francisco or another Austin or another Dallas or another New York. Tulsa is Tulsa, and we're looking for people that are passionate about what Tulsa has to offer and helping cultivate what's already here. We want people to feel like they are connected and a part of the fabric of Tulsa as a city.
And it's being a part of that fabric of Tulsa that has given Taylor the sense of identity and community that she'd been looking for.
After my workday is up, I have a community that I can go hang out with. I think the sense of community outside of the home really helps alleviate the feeling of being isolated and confined working virtually. Everywhere I go in Tulsa, I feel like I have a name. Like I'm not just a number on a subway or a number at a gym. I mean, there is that close, genuine connection and relationship building that's being cultivated here that makes you really proud to call Tulsa home, that makes me proud to wear my Tulsa gear and wave my Tulsa flag.
If before I spoke to you, I would have been like, okay, the city needs to have like, I don't know, a brewery, a coffee shop, good Wi-Fi, and I don't know. And like, that's what you need to attract top talent.
Didn't think about it because you show up to the brewery, you show up to the coffee shop, but what if people aren't kind? What if people don't want to talk to you?
Right.
You know, that completely strips the experience.
I think New York only has those kinds of coffee shops.
Yeah. Like I said, the small town feel is like that Southern hospitality, you know your neighbor, with all of the city amenities. But the city amenities really come secondary to that charm and a value of relationship building and community.
Which is what you were looking for when you applied in the first place, right? Community.
Yeah.
You were seeking it and you received it.
Amen. Yes.
Thank you for listening to City of the Future, a podcast from Sidewalk Labs. Your hosts are Vanessa Quirk and me, Eric Jaffe. We are produced by Benjamin Walker and Andrew Calloway.
Mixed by Zach McNeese. Special thanks to Taylor Allen, Richard Florida, Annette Numa, Sten Tumkivi, and Chantel Rowe.
Our art is by the great Tim Cow. Our music is composed by Adam James Levine Arity. If you want to hear more of Adam's work, you can check out his band, Lost Amsterdam, at amsterdamlost.com.
To learn more about Sidewalk Labs, visit our website at sidewalklabs.com, where you can subscribe to our newsletter at the bottom of the page. And you can also follow us on Instagram at City of the Future Pod.
A quick note to our listeners, our next episode will come out not in 2 weeks, but in 3 on November 20th. So make sure you're subscribed to City of the Future, and you'll see that episode pop up in your feed.
See you in the future.